Narayana namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam mudirayet. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. So the chapter is entitled Calculation of Time from the Atom. So which means that basically the idea of time is being discussed in this chapter, but then they're going all the way to atomic time. So one would wonder that in the previous millenniums, which is when the Vedic sages were on the planet, and when people functioned according to Vedic literature and they completely had deep faith, the level of scientific awareness and the amount of, I would say, knowledge that was available was unprecedented. It is not something which we can even hope to, be conceptualized at this time. It's just very, very fascinating that they did not have all the modern, I would say, equipment, but then the level of knowledge which they had was just phenomenal. And what is interesting is that they're actually dedicating an entire chapter to the discussion of time in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So one wonders, what would be the relevance of discussing time in the context of us trying to approach Krishna? Because one of the features of Krishna is that he is time. He says this in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the time I am. I've come as a destroyer. So time destroys. And basically, here, this entire chapter is being dedicated because they want to give us some perspective of the kind of operation which Lord Brahma had undertaken, the intricacy of operation which Lord Brahma had undertaken, was empowered to do. I just remember a few things from my childhood. I used to go to a school in southern India, and every day as I walked past the market to reach the school, and then I used to come back, there were rows of shops which dealt with jewelry. They used to do jewelry repair, and they used to actually repair gold and silver jewelry. And in the past, in those areas, they used to have what we would call an open drain. It is like you have a shop, and you might have seen this in Vrindavan. You might have come across this phenomenon in Vrindavan, where you have a shop, and then just below the shop, you have an open drain that's running. And I used to notice something quite interesting. I used to see a group of people sitting down in the drain, and they used to sift the water, and they used to sift the grains of sand in the drain, looking for, the pieces of jewelry that could have by mistake fallen into the water because there are a bunch of repair shops, and then the chances of some repair actually leading to a little drop of gold or silver falling into the water was quite high. And there were groups of people who actually used to make a living by sifting through water to find small grains of gold, small grains of silver, and that basically was their livelihood. It was quite interesting. And what makes me bring that up here is the fact that you actually focus and measure what you consider as valuable. You see, if you consider something as valuable, then you need to measure it, because you really need to measure whatever is considered to be valuable. If something is not valuable, then, or if it's available in plentiful quantity, then you don't really bother measuring it. But then you measure things and you quantify it, and you break things down to the smallest possible measurement if such a commodity is considered to be of very high value. So what is very interesting is that right smack in the middle of Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a very big chapter. I mean, there's a chapter of almost, I would say, 40 verses that are dedicated to the measurement of time. And the measurement of time is such an important preoccupation in Vedic times. that, for instance, the longevity of an individual, is not measured in terms of number of days, number of hours, minutes. Vedic time, they used to measure the longevity of an individual by the number of inhalations and exhalations. You know, how many inhalations can one possibly have? How many exhalations can one possibly have? This is basically how they used to measure the longevity of a person. Longevity is not so much number of days, minutes, hours. It's one inhalation, one exhalation, which is one basic cycle. One breathing cycle is how they measure longevity, because karmically, you're allowed a certain fixed number of breathing cycles. You have a fixed number of inhalations, fixed number of exhalations. And this was known to the sages. And this is very clearly seen in the Yoga Sutras, very specifically. You know, we don't bother much in Bhakti Yoga, but then the Yoga Sutras, those who practically are more, I would say, dependent on how they manage life, you know, in the sense the outcomes are more dependent on how they manage things. Yoga Sutras, which is Ashtanga Yoga, etc., focuses on how efficient you are, not so much in terms of mercy. In Bhakti Yoga, there's a greater awareness of mercy and less, I would say, focus on how efficient we could be. And in Ashtanga Yoga, there's a greater focus on how efficient you are because there isn't much mercy available. It's a process. Now, when you have such a process, there are multiple steps. So in Ashtanga Yoga, you start with yama, niyama, then you have asana, then you have pranayama, and then you have pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. So this is the 8 different steps of Ashtanga Yoga. What is interesting is that the 3rd step of asana is what we see as being most predominantly practiced around the world, which became super famous since the early part of the century. You know, since year 2000, since the millennium began, it became very famous throughout the world, and every street and corner has a yoga studio around the West and in India as well, in many parts. Now, this is basically the Hatha Yoga process. And the Hatha Yoga process is combined with pranayama, which is the 4th step. And why was it that people even had an inclination to practice pranayama? Why was there even a need for the sages to introduce pranayama? Pranayama was introduced very specifically because you could control the number of inhalations and exhalations. If you're going to be given a fixed quantity of breathing in, breathing out, but then you want to accomplish things in life and you don't want to waste the fixed quantity, what you want to do is you want to make sure that the breathing in and breathing out is done very efficiently so that you do fewer times of breathing in and breathing out, but then you're able to kind of exist with fewer breathing in and breathing out, thereby extending the amount of time you have on the planet. So the sages derived pranayama, and one of the main functions of pranayama is to be very efficient in terms of the breathing in, breathing out, where they could actually control their longevity and their time span on the planet by extending the number of cycles of breathing in and breathing out, or the efficiency of breathing in and breathing out. So there was awareness in different yogic systems of the fact that you could measure time in terms of one exhalation, one inhalation. And it's quite interesting that they have dedicated an entire chapter in Srimad Bhagavatam to this, because it is a very valuable commodity. It is an extraordinarily valuable commodity. We seldom realize it because we have no control over it. That's the beauty. We have no control over time, and as a consequence, we seldom bother with it, and we don't realize that it's an extraordinarily valuable commodity. The sages, the rishis, the accomplished transcendentalists, they have control over time. They have control over time. They had control over time. For such a transcendentalist, these detailed level of breaking down and knowledge, etc., is basically what they kind of accept and say that, yes, we are aware of this. So some part of Vedic literature is dedicated to this because of the fact that you can actually control it. We have no control over time. And as a consequence, we don't consider it as a valuable commodity. We don't. Yeah, we realize it as a principle. In principle, we realize that time is valuable. We speak about it occasionally, but we have no control over how things go. As a consequence, we just don't bother with it in terms of the intricacy. But the sages do, because they had control. They had immense control in terms of what they could do. They knew how to extend the time on the planet. They knew when to leave, when to come back. They understood everything. They understood the cycles. And as a consequence, this knowledge was a part of how they lived. So understanding time was not some extra piece of knowledge which people wanted to have. It is how they lived. It was lifestyle. It's just a matter of lifestyle. It's like us knowing the bus schedule, us knowing perhaps the subway schedule if you use the subway or the tube in London. It's just a matter of knowing what is available. So we just know what we need, but then for them, this was intricate because they knew how to manage it, they knew how to control it, extend it, etc. Now, how is this relevant in terms of the Srimad Bhagavatam? How is it relevant in terms of the daily practitioner, devotee, who practically, in one sense, doesn't have any control? We just don't have any control because our clock has been set at the time of birth. Our clock has been set at the time of birth as to how many inhalations and how many exhalations this entity is going to have on the planet. However, Krishna modifies our existence on the planet. So one of the things that we need to understand is that longevity of a devotee is not controlled by karma, it is controlled by Krishna, which means that if Krishna chooses to keep us around, he can keep us around. If Krishna chooses to take us out earlier, he can take us out earlier, regardless of karma. And this is managed based on what is most optimum for our well-being in terms of our sadhana, in terms of what is required. He can do what is required and he can take us out. And this has nothing to do with being in good health or bad health. It's a misconception. It's a Western concept when you associate health with number of years on the planet. It's a very Western concept to associate health with longevity. Health and longevity have nothing to do with each other. One could be very healthy and leave soon. One could be very unhealthy and live for a very, very long time. And that's the Vedic concept. So in one sense, the average devotee does not have any control because we have taken birth and we are heading towards a certain, I would say, an outcome. And this is based on our karma. Just as much as there were special movements of birth, there are special movements of departure. How one is going to depart is also being pre-designated based on, karma. So it is not something which you can simply say that death is the same for everyone. Death is not the same for everyone. Birth is not the same for everyone. It differs. So is the case with death, because death is not the same for everyone. So this is very important for us to understand as well, that the average devotee doesn't have a very good conception of how to manage things because they don't have any control. So it's almost as if you don't bother with things which you can't control. So what's the point? Why should I belabor? Why should I break my head on something which I can't control anyway? So we just go about it. Yeah. So this is very important for us to realize that Krishna is giving us information because it is important for us. And this is a very important piece of information for us to be able to be cognizant of and for us to be able to manage. It's very important. The beginning of our birth, it's already been decided how many breaths of exhalations, inhalations we are going to take. And we are pushed towards a certain lifestyle. We are pushed towards certain aspirations. And those aspirations contain a certain quantity, or I would say a certain quality in terms of the mode of ignorance and mode of passion. As it contains the mode of ignorance and mode of passion, it depletes our ability to exist on the planet. Yeah, it kind of depletes our ability. So how do you manage it? What is it that you can do with this information? If you understand that Krishna took the trouble through Maitreya Rishi to explain to Sri Vidura about atomic time, then how do we take advantage, because it's right smack in the middle of the Srimad Bhagavatam as we read it. So how do we take advantage of this piece of information about, atomic time? One of the things that we can do is that we don't need to measure atomic time. We do not need to measure the minutes of the day. We do not need to measure the hours and so on and so forth. We do not need to. I mean, that's a part of planning. I remember my spiritual master, His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Maharaj. He used to sleep for 4 hours and he used to eat 1 meal a day. And his calendar was planned for every 30 minutes. So as one makes advancements spiritually, they become very busy to the point where every 30 minutes, he used to know exactly what he was going to do, because he used to consider the time that was given to him as super valuable, because it belonged to Srila Prabhupada. Because it belonged to Srila Prabhupada, it was not his property. The body was not his property. The time was not his. It belonged to his guru. So he practically used to plan it in such a way, in a mood of submission, that every 30 minutes he knew exactly what he needed to do for Srila Prabhupada's pleasure. So this is very important for us to realize, that as one makes advancement in spiritual life, then one becomes very time conscious, and you start planning, you start taking into account the fact that, this is how you want to spend the year, this is how you want to spend the month, this is how you want to spend the week and the days, etc. All of this becomes super important as you make advancement, because you understand that this commodity is very precious, because it belongs to the Lord, and you want to take advantage of, as much as you can in terms of this particular environment, the arrangement that has been made in this lifetime. So if one appreciates the arrangement that have been made in terms of coming in touch with Christian consciousness, coming in touch with the Guru, coming in touch with the Mahamantra, coming in touch with the deity forms, Dham, Srimad Bhagavatam, the association of devotees, when one appreciates all of this, then one basically becomes a little bit more aware that they could push themselves to do the maximum. So, but again, we have an issue. We don't have much control. You see, we don't have controls. And how do you control something that you don't control, or you cannot control? Then how do you establish control? So that's basically, I think, what we should try and focus on. Again, go back to what I shared earlier. How many breaths you would take, and how many exhalations and how many inhalations you would have in this lifetime is entirely dependent on the time of your birth, because you bring karma, and that karma is arranged in a certain way based on the mode of ignorance, mode of passion, mode of goodness, and based on the combination of the different modes and how we interact with the mode, we are going to be propelled into certain activity. And as we're getting propelled into certain activity, we don't have control, because if you're in the lower mode, you don't have control. You just go along with the mode of passion, you go along with the mode of ignorance, you don't have any control. Now, how do you manage things on a day-to-day basis? You see, one of the most important things for us to realize is that if you can bring a great deal of auspiciousness at the inception of your day, which is sunrise, then that particular day would be very, very fruitful. You will be able to do a lot with time during that particular day if you had the ability to focus during sunrise. This was demonstrated by the sages in Naimisharanya. They chose Naimisharanya because Naimisharanya is considered to be the hub. And according to Bhugola, which is the science of geography, the science of topography which existed, they understood that that was the hub, that was the center of the planet. And according to the calculations of the universe even, they considered that particular point to be an extraordinarily powerful, spiritual center. And they all gathered in Naimisharanya at the beginning of the millennium, of the beginning of the Yuga, so that they could engage in extraordinarily powerful spiritual activities such as fire sacrifices and the chanting and the discussions about the glories of the Lord. And this was going to influence the rest of the Yuga. So you practically influence the time factor in your life by making things super auspicious during inceptions. So this is a very important culture that we need to understand as devotees, because we have been given a morning program, we have been given waking up for the Mangalarti, we have been given the chanting program, the worship of Tulsi Maharani, and the Bhagavatam class. All of this, for most part, is centered around the morning hours. If we just stick to what Srila Prabhupada has given, we will find that we have a much better handle on the quantity and the quality of time that's been given to us than if we were to not do it during that particular time. Go along with the same principle. When Lord Brahma created the universe, that is the beginning of time. Let us assume that, because he is the creator, he's the secondary creator. It's the beginning of time. He creates the universe while Sri Garbhodakashayi Vishnu is lying on the Garbhodaka water, and he is practically meditating on the Lord as he is creating the universe. So when he is creating the universe, what was the activity that preceded Lord Brahma's effort in creation? The activity that preceded Lord Brahma's effort in creation was to chant for 1,000 years. He chanted for 1,000 celestial years after receiving instructions from Krishna, and he developed deep realizations and became spiritually mature to enter into the activity that he had to go through. So this is basically a beginning. What you invest in the beginning would actually set the tone for what is going to come after. So in that sense, what I am trying to say is every day is a beginning for us. Every day is a beginning. Every Gaur Purnima is a beginning for us. Every Gaur Purnima is a beginning. Because for us, because we are followers of Lord Gauranga, we tend to begin our year with Gaurabda. Every Gaur Purnima, practically, we want to exist to serve Lord Gauranga. We want to exist for us to be able to position ourselves so that this Gaurabda, this particular year is far more fruitful, productive, at least from our effort perspective, not so much in terms of results. Results are controlled by Lord Chaitanya. From our effort perspective, we want to improve upon what we already know as what we did in the previous year. Because we do not want to experience the same results as the previous year. We are saying, yes, I've understood that this is what I did the previous year, but then this year I want to improve upon my effort, because if I were to improve upon my effort, the Lord's mercy is such that there would be reciprocation. So we want to work on increasing our effort. But how do you manage this? You manage this by being extraordinarily worshipful, prayerful on that particular day, which is the Gaurabda, which is the Gaur Purnima. We become extraordinarily prayerful on Nasima Chaturdasi. We become extraordinarily prayerful on, the Janmashtami, Radhashtami, Balram Purnima. Why do we do it? Because on those days, we have the ability to alter the quality of time that exists going forward. We do it because we have the ability to make changes for the next 365 days. 1 year until the next Balram Purnima, 1 year until the next Janmashtami, 1 year until the next Gaurabda, which is Gaur Purnima. If you are very steadfast in being able to observe fasting, you're very serious about your service, you're very serious about the chanting, then we have the ability to make a shift in the quality of outcomes for the next 1 year. This is a very important fact. We need to learn by principle from Srimad Bhagavatam. Why did they gather in Naimisharanya at the beginning of Kali Yuga? They gathered so that they could influence the quality of time for the rest of the Yuga. This was their power. They were so powerful that they could gather around and make an influence on the quality of time for an entire Yuga. Yeah. But we have our responsibility. We are of wherever we are in terms of our resources, our spiritual maturity, our understanding, etc. Yeah, an opportunity. We need to take advantage in a similar fashion by saying that this is what's been given to us. This is basically a year. It begins at a certain time. And then there are multiple points in the year where the festivals, and those festivals are also beginnings. And these can practically alter the quality of time that comes forward. What is the meaning of altering the quality of time? It simply means that we have the ability to use it in the service of Krishna. That's the whole idea. Otherwise, we will be wasting it because we don't understand the value. We just don't understand what's valuable, what's not valuable. We just cannot. Every one of us goes through moments where we have practically wasted an entire day. We practically have wasted an entire month. We have wasted an entire 12 months. And then we feel that nothing has been accomplished because we feel as if, we have kind of been left, what I would call as, we have been left with almost nothing, even though we basically existed. We feel, we kind of have become remorseful, saying we could have done better. Yeah, if you're sincere, we become remorseful. We could have done better. I could have used my time better. This belongs to my spiritual master. This belongs to Prabhupada, belongs to Krishna. I could have done better. Yeah, but then the point is that most of us don't realize it. We don't realize that we can manage time, and time needs to be managed during these festival days, because this is exactly how you do it. How do you manage it during the mornings? You manage your morning and you'll find that the day is fantastic. You manage the year during the festival days. Seek more mercy. Yeah. These are very important considerations, and which is why they knew how to measure time, because they knew that if you start something on a certain day, that can have an alteration, it can practically alter and make changes throughout the year for you. They knew that. So they started in Naimisharanya. They talk about Lord Brahma basically offers, and he chants so that he could be empowered, so that he could begin his life, his existence. So we ought to take cues from all of this. Yeah, we ought to take cues, and we have to say, how is it that we can practically implement this information? We need to get serious about implementing it. And this can be done in several ways, as I mentioned before. In summary, you can implement it on a daily basis through the morning program. If you cannot do anything in the morning, you can only chant, that is perfect. Yeah, if you can just chant, it's perfect. If you can add Guru Puja, it's even better. And you can worship Mother Tulsi. You can do all of these in the morning. It's just fantastic, because you will have much better control of how you could offer the day to Krishna. This is very important. And then every festival, use the festival as what you would call as a pivot, as a starting point for you to be able to move forward and offer prayers, so that that particular starting point is invested with a lot of spiritual energy, and you kind of pay a lot of attention to how it's being done on that particular day. So this is basically the information that we can derive from these discussions on time, because time in itself, if it's managed carefully, is basically how one becomes successful versus not. Yeah, it's a matter of how much we can do and the quality of our offering as well. So it's a matter of what we can do to contribute. All right, so let's go through the verses, and we'll start with chapter 11. I'm going to read the English translation as usual, and we will just go through it. And if I need to comment, I'll just add some comments. The material manifestation's ultimate particle, which is indivisible and not formed into a body, is called the atom. It exists always as an invisible identity, even after the dissolution of all forms. The material body is but a combination of such atoms, but it is misunderstood by the common man. Atoms are the ultimate state of the manifest universe. When they stay in their own forms without forming different bodies, they are called the unlimited oneness. There are certainly different bodies in physical forms, but the atoms themselves form the complete manifestation. One can estimate time by measuring the movement of the atomic combination of bodies. Time is the potency of the Almighty Personality of Godhead Hari, who controls all physical movement, although he is not visible in the physical world. Atomic time is measured according to its covering a particular atomic space. That time which covers the unmanifest aggregate of atoms is called the great time. The divisions of gross time is calculated as follows. 2 atoms make one double atom, and 3 double atoms make one hexaatom. This hexatom is visible in the sunshine which enters through the holes of a window screen. One can clearly see that the hexatom goes up towards the sky. This particular phenomenon is basically noticed by all of us. So that's being described here, is that the hexatom is visible in the sunshine which enters through the holes of a window screen. So sometimes you do see those. It is almost as if it's like an alternate state. It is not physically visible, but then sometimes you see it when sunlight passes through. The time duration needed for the integration of 3 trasarenus is called a truti, and 100 trutis make one Veda, 3 Vedas make one lava. The duration of time of 3 lavas is equal to 1 nimesha. The combination of 3 nimeshas make 1 shana. 5 shanas combined together make 1 kasta, and 15 kastas make 1 lagu. 15 lagus make 1 nadika, which is also called a danda. 2 dandas make 1 muhurta, and 6 or 7 dandas make 1/4 of a day or night, according to human calculation. The measuring pot for 1 nadika or danda can be prepared with a 6 pala weight, 14 ounces pot of copper, in which a hole is bored with a gold probe weighing 4 masa and measuring 4 fingers long. When the pot is placed on water, the time before the water overflows in the pot is called 1 danda. It is calculated that there are 4 praharas, which are also called yamas, in the day and 4 in the night of the human being. Similarly, 15 days and nights are a fortnight, and there are 2 fortnights, white and black, in a month. There is an interesting phenomenon. I couldn't help hear this now. As I sit here in Vrindavan, a very interesting phenomenon takes place. We live in Raman Reti, which is, I think, I would say around 5 minutes from our temple, Krishna Balram Mandir. What is very interesting is that every hour there's someone who actually rings a bell. This is like physically someone picks up what we would call an old-fashioned, gong or whatever it is, and they ring the bell. The number of hours has passed. For example, 12 noon, they would ring the bell 12 times. 1 o'clock in the morning, it would be once. Yeah. So it is interesting. Even now it's ringing. It's ringing basically in terms of the 7 o'clock in the evening time frame. What is interesting is that this particular person, whoever does it all the way throughout the night, which is like 24 hours. It goes on right till the morning. And then I didn't know, when I first moved in here, I did not know why someone was taking the trouble, because in the modern day, in 2021, we have a little phones, everybody is wearing a watch, and you don't really need someone to basically make you conscious of that this is the 12 noon, this is basically 1 o'clock, etc. Why is it that someone is basically, beating that gong and advising us that this is the time? And this happens every 30 minutes. So, for example, 4 o'clock in the afternoon would be 4 times, 4:30 would be once. So they would beat the gong. Then later, as I was just going through the Leelamrita of Srila Prabhupada, I got to know that this was Srila Prabhupada's arrangement. He practically insisted that the Krishna Balram Mandir appoint someone who is going to beat the clock, or rather, who's going to beat the gong every hour. And this is someone who practically needs to do it like 24 hours, 365 days of a year, no compromise. And I've been living here and I hear this every day without a beat. You can practically, you can kind of time things, and I kind of chant my mantras, etc., based on that beating. I kind of found out it was Srila Prabhupada's arrangement. Then I wondered, why would Srila Prabhupada make that arrangement? Why would Srila Prabhupada have someone, beat a gong, while even in the 1970s, you had clocks. You could have set an electronic clock to go off. He practically had someone physically beat a gong like the old days. The explanation is given is that he practically took this as a management objective, which means that he practically wanted whoever was managing the Krishna Balram Mandir to be conscious to such an extent that they are even managing the smallest of details. And this was one of the details which they had to manage. This was Srila Prabhupada's arrangement. And it's fascinating to hear that he practically wanted to make them conscious. He wanted to make them conscious that, Krishna sleeps at a certain time, he wakes up at a certain time, that there's Leela going on in different times of the day. And every time there's a gong is hit and then there's a time frame. In Vrindavan, you become conscious that Krishna is basically engaging in some kind of Leela, very specific Leela. Yeah, a very specific type of Leela. It is described in Shastra, but then this becomes extraordinarily useful. It becomes extraordinarily useful as a measuring, I would say, as a measure for the devotees who are not very used to being able to manage their time. And this is something that he incorporated. So I was very, very fascinated. I thought this was something else. I thought it was maybe one of the ashrams here who are a bit old-fashioned. I did not know it was Srila Prabhupada. And then I later discovered it was Srila Prabhupada. Yeah, that it was his arrangement. Yeah, it's quite fascinating. But then I was just wanting to say that a part of spiritual advancement is being conscious of time. If you're not going to be conscious of the time that's been given to us, and if you cannot manage your time, which means you don't have it together, which means that there's trouble in the spiritual activity that you're engaging in. We should take that as a sign. If we do not have control over your day, it means that Kala, which we understand is the supreme time, which is Krishna himself, we understand that, but it is also karma. It's overpowering us. Yeah. So how do you manage it? It has to be efficiently managed. And we go back again to what I mentioned earlier. What you do in the morning is going to allow you to control the day. It's a very simple principle. Yeah, very simple. So please remember that. Try incorporating it, and you will find that you're fairly successful through the year in being able to manage your time throughout the day. Yeah, I can hear the bell going on, and it's this. This is basically an Arati bell because it's 7 o'clock Gaur Arati in one of the temples around here. But then I was just wanting to share what we saw here in our Krishna Balram Mandir. There's someone who is always doing this. It's almost as if they don't want to disobey Srila Prabhupada, which is a fact. We don't want to disobey him because he had a reason for all of these things, and he basically gave us instructions. But I was just wanting to share that because I heard the bell. The aggregate of 2 fortnights is 1 month, and the period is 1 complete day and the night for the Pitta planets. 2 of such months comprise 1 season. 6 months comprise 1 complete movement of the sun from south to north. The aggregate of 2 fortnights in 1 month. So there is a dark fortnight, and then there is a white fortnight, or rather, there is Shukla, Paksha. Shukla is white. Shukla means white. And then there's Krishna, Paksha. Paksha means division or fortnight. And then you have the Shukla Paksha and the Krishna Paksha. So 1 month is divided into 2 parts. How is this divided? Krishna Paksha is actually of a lower quality than Shukla Paksha. That's called the waning phase of the moon. You might have heard of this in English. There is the waxing phase, which is the Shukla Paksha, and then there is the waning phase, which is the Krishna Paksha. If you begin a new activity in Krishna Paksha, it wouldn't last long because there is a greater degree of mode of ignorance in Krishna Paksha. Compared to Shukla Paksha, there's a greater degree of mode of ignorance. This Krishna Paksha has nothing to do with Krishna. Krishna means black. It doesn't have to do with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what I'm saying is that there's Krishna Paksha and Shukla Paksha. Krishna Paksha is the dark half, and that's when you have, it actually ends with the Amavasya. It ends with the new moon. And during that particular 15 days of the month, activity that is begun doesn't last for long because there's a greater degree of mode of ignorance. So this was known, that's why they divided the waning and the waxing phases of moon. And then activity is begun based on such calculations. Then you have Ayanna, which is the movement of the sun. This is the other big movement, which is also spoken of in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Ayanna literally means that the sun is going on a northern course, and then the sun is entering the southern course. It is said that spiritualists want to leave their bodies in the northern course. So the months from January all the way up to this particular month, August, is considered to be the 6 months. 6 months here, 6 months, June, end of June. 6 months is considered to be what I would call as Uttarayana. This is considered to be auspicious. And then the remaining 6 months is considered to be, having a greater quality of the mode of ignorance. So spiritualists have a tendency to figure out, when they want to leave the body because they have control over time. And as a consequence, they make arrangements to leave during the northern course, which is, this particular time frame that we are in, which is ending now. Yeah, this is when the sun moves in the northern course. We read in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam that Bhishma Dev was waiting to leave when the northern course began. He basically was waiting for the northern course to begin. Bhishma Dev, before leaving his body, was waiting for the northern course to begin. So there's a very important consideration for those who have control over time. This very important consideration. Yeah. For those of us who do not have control over time, we need to manage our time by bringing in Krishna at important junctions of the day. I mean, Krishna needs to be involved at all times. So what do? Those of you who are second initiated, you do your Gayatri at sunrise. Yeah. Then you do a Gayatri in the afternoon. Then there's a Gayatri which is done in the evening. There are 3 different junctions where the Gayatri is being done, where we remember Krishna. Then early in the morning, we're offering so many different prayers. This basically is management. Yeah, it is management of time, because as you manage this activity of spirituality in terms of you being able to interact with your sadhana during different junctions of time, what you will find is that you can offer more of the day to Krishna. More of the day can be offered to Krishna. Less is offerable if you don't have control over sadhana. So where should we begin? Where should we begin? We should practically begin by doing what is required in the morning. If you begin by doing what is required in the morning, or if you want to manage time, just focus on what you need to do appropriately at each and every junction. If you're second initiated, manage your Gayatris. If you're first initiated, manage waking up in the morning and chanting your rounds. If you're not initiated, does not matter. Wake up in the morning and manage your rounds. This would practically set the course for the rest of the day. It's interesting. 2 solar movements make one day and night of the demigods, and the combination of day and night is one complete calendar year for the human being. The human being has a duration of life of 100 years. Influential stars, planets, luminaries, and atoms all over the universe are rotating in the respective orbits and the direction of the Supreme, represented by eternal Kala. There are 5 different names for the orbits of the sun, moon, stars, and luminaries in the firmament, and they each have their own samvatsara. You should read this chapter, but I'm just going through it quickly after sharing the gist. O Vidura, the sun enlivens all living entities with his unlimited heat and light. He diminishes the duration of life of all living entities in order to release them from the illusion of material attachment, and he enlarges the path of elevation to the heavenly kingdom. He thus moves in the firmament with great velocity, and therefore everyone should offer him respects once every 5 years with all ingredients of worship. Now, this particular description of the sun god is basically a description of Krishna manifesting himself as Surya Narayana. So this manifestation is highly detailed in a detailed description. You can find that in the 5th canto. There's an entire chapter dedicated to the worship of Surya Narayana, and you can find those details. So this is basically a reference to that part. Yeah. I now understand, Vidura said, I now understand the life durations of the residents of the Pitta planets and heavenly planets, as well as that of the human beings. Now kindly inform me of the durations of life of those great learned living entities who are beyond the range of a kalpa. Now, what is interesting is that destruction that occurs at the end of Lord Brahma's day, when he is sleeping, there's destruction. When we sleep, there is destruction. There is destruction when we sleep as well. We are destroying time. We are destroying life. There's no doubt about it. When Lord Brahma is resting, before he rests, he begins his meditations on Mahavishnu. He begins his meditations on Garbhodakashaya Vishnu. As he is meditating on Lord Vishnu as he rests, Lord Brahma is also dreaming about Lord Vishnu. And because he's dreaming, the Lord instructs him during his sleep. He is actually receiving instructions as he's resting in the night. Yeah, this is a very powerful thing to understand, that if you're going to spend a good quantity of time sleeping, if you know how to make it auspicious, then that time is also saved, because otherwise we are just destroying it. One may say that we need the rest for the body. Yes, that is all understood. It is very clear. However, the idea is to ensure that while we are resting, there's engagement in devotional service. And the way to do it is for us to ensure that we are getting into the mood of sleeping, either by lying down and you can just chant in your, under your breath as you just whisper and you just chant, and then you slowly get into deeper sleep, or you read Bhagavatam and then you rest. And then while you're resting, you also keep chanting, and then you drift away into sleep. What happens is that if you get used to it, then the sleep time is also used because the vibrations continue. The mind is already engaged. It continues repeating things. And as a consequence, you find that even those times, the dreams and the so-called ability to kind of connect with Krishna remains intact as we sleep as well. We don't really drift away to such an extent into mode of ignorance. So it's interesting to see that Lord Brahma actually meditates on Garbhodakashaya Vishnu and receives instructions in the dream. He actually receives instructions while he's dreaming in the night. And when he goes to bed, when Lord Brahma goes to bed, there's destruction of Swargaloka, which means all the planetary systems of the Devas are destroyed. Yeah. These are Lord Indra's planetary system, Swargaloka, everything is put to destruction during the sleep of Lord Brahma. Then our planet, which is the planet Earth, the middle planetary system, is destroyed. And then below Patala is destroyed. So everything below Maharloka is just destroyed. It is said that Maharloka is predominated by great saintly personalities who are basically waiting for the millennium to end. They're waiting for Lord Brahma to end. And in Maharloka, in that universe, you also have incarnations. You have incarnations who have visited Earth, who are also waiting to reincarnate when the time comes, because Maharloka is at a different level above, which means they are in Maharloka and then they visit Earth when they're supposed to incarnate, which means the incarnations of the Lord are also worshipped in Maharloka. Yeah, great personalities are there. Now it is said that when Lord Brahma goes to bed, there is destruction below the Maharloka, but then Maharloka feels the heat. Yeah, there's a lot of heat generated by the destruction that occurs by Lord Ananta. Lord Ananta is glancing up, his fiery eyes are blowing fire towards the lower planetary systems below Swargaloka, and they are destroyed. But then there's an extraordinary amount of heat. During those times when there's destruction, the residents of Maharloka, they migrate upward to Janaloka, Tapaloka, and even Satyaloka, because they're all mystics. They're all, highly advanced spiritualists. You have, for example, you have Sri Brigu, you have the different rishis, completely very accomplished transcendentalists live in Maharloka, and they all leave and then go up to Tapaloka, Janaloka, etc. But then there are also incarnations in Maharloka who descend and then come back in, whenever there's a need. So it's a very complex system, but then it's beautiful to know that there's such detailed information. And then you find that everything below is destroyed. So is the case with us. When we rest, there is some level of destruction that occurs in the lower part of the body. There is some destruction that occurs in the lower part of the body. Yeah, which means that basically the lower part of the body, which means that below the navel, contains all kinds of subtle desires and all kinds of unwanted attachments and so on. The greater such attachments and unwanted desires exist, there would be a greater level of destruction that occurs when we go to bed. Yeah. So the 3 Gayatris that we do, which is the morning Gayatri at 6, there's an afternoon Gayatri at 12, then there's a Gayatri at 6 in the evening. These are all Gayatris that practically set the stage for preserving what we have. This is all about being able to remember Krishna so that we could preserve our energy, we are able to remember him, and then we are able to use our resources so that we could move forward. It is setting the stage for the next Gayatri. Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj, who is the Shiksha Guru of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he used to say that one is considered an animal who sleeps before 12 midnight and is still asleep after 4 in the morning. So his sleeping and waking was 12 midnight to 4 in the morning. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, you notice when you read his biography, when you read his biography, you find that he hardly slept 2 hours and he was extraordinarily productive, which means that he had complete control over time. See, this is very remarkable. When you see someone being able to remain awake throughout the night and engage in Krishna consciousness, it means that they have complete control over the nature of time. Krishna has given them, their time to control. There's no more influence of eternal time. There's no more influence of destructive time. They are on their own idea. They're on their own plane. They're able to manage their time and they're able to use it effectively. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur used to pace back and forth in Mayapur. Throughout the night, he used to be chanting. He used to, he practically accomplished so much within his lifetime, so much, over 100 books, the discovery of Lord Chaitanya's birthplace, re-establishing the Siddhanta, and then most importantly, training Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, engaging in debates. It's just fascinating to see his life. But how did he have such control of productivity? He had this control of productivity for the simple reason is because he was highly spiritualized, which means that he knew exactly how to manage time. Yeah, and you don't manage time because Krishna is time. You basically submit yourself at an appropriate junction so that Krishna trusts you with time. Yeah, which is what happens. With the more spiritual we become, the greater the freedom, because then you have the ability to stay awake as much as you want. Nothing can stop you. You can just stay awake throughout the night, be productive, and then you could just kind of offer everything to Krishna. So this is seen by Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj. Why did I mention that? Is because there is the fourth Gayatri too. The fourth Gayatri, or rather, I wouldn't use the fourth Gayatri. Sorry, perhaps the fourth junction, Sandhi, is 12 midnight. Yeah, 12 midnight is also the fourth Sandhi. And that Sandhi is also considered by transcendentalists to be very important. They chant, they offer prayers, they actually begin a lot of spiritual activity 12 midnight. Yeah, 12 midnight, because that is basically a time which is also considered to be, where everybody who is deeply in the mode of ignorance is sleeping, and everybody who is a transcendentalist finds that the atmosphere is quite calm, and then they are able to chant. So they wake up 12 midnight. There are many devotees who wake up, they go to bed at 8 and they wake up at 12, and then they start worshipping the deities in terms of getting themselves ready for the day, starting to chant, etc. So the point being that the greater the awareness of the gift of Krishna consciousness and greater the awareness of what's been given, we will try our very best to preserve things. Yeah. And the way to preserve it is to submit ourselves to spiritual practice at different important junctions during the year, different important junctions during the day. And this would allow us a greater level of freedom for us to be able to move forward. So this is very, very important for us to understand. Yeah, that even the midnight time frame is critical. That junction is also critical. And I'm not suggesting anyone to remain, awake during midnight or anything. As long as we are able to accomplish the Mangalarti, we're good. But I was just wanting to say that is considered to be super important by transcendentalists as well, because it's a very important junction of time. Vedic time is not measured from one midnight to another. We do not measure days from one midnight to another. For us, a day is when the sun comes out. For us, a day is when the next sunrise occurs. So that's 24 hours for us. We do not measure time from one midnight to another. That's a modern Kali Yuga conception. We don't have that particular interest to measure time that way. So we want to be aware of the fact that midnight is also very much within the day. Yeah. O spiritually powerful one, I'm going back to the verses. I'm on verse 17. O spiritually powerful one, you can understand the movements of eternal time, which is the controlling form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because you are a self-realized person, you can see everything by the power of mystic vision. O Vidura, Maitreya said, O Vidura, the 4 millenniums are called Satya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali Yugas. The aggregate number of years of all those combined is equal to 12,000 years of the demigods. The duration of the Satya millennium equals 4,800 years of the demigods. The duration of the Treta millennium equals 3,600 years of the demigods. Duration of the Dwapara millennium equals 2,400 years, and that of the Kali millennium is 1,200 years of the demigods. The transitional periods before and after every millennium, which are a few hundred years, as aforementioned, are known as Yuga Sandhyas, or the conjunctions of 2 millenniums, according to the expert astronomers. In these periods, all kinds of religious activities are performed. Again, this is a verse. I'm reading verse 20. The transitional periods before and after every millennium, which are a few hundred years, as aforementioned, are known as Yuga Sandhyas. Sandhya means junction, yeah, or the conjunction of 2 millenniums, according to the expert astronomers. In these periods, all kinds of religious activities are performed. So this is where you're getting a clue from this chapter on how to manage time. If you are able to manage the junctions of time, then you have the ability to contribute towards a more fruitful day. This is very important for us to understand. It is all about being able to manage the junctions. We want to be conscious because that's how you divide time. We want to be conscious so we come in touch with Krishna during the times as specified in the Shastra, and then we are able to give a lot more. O Vidura, in the Satya millennium, mankind properly and completely maintained the principles of religion, but in other millenniums, religion gradually decreased by 1 part as irreligion was proportionately admitted. Outside the 3 planetary systems, Svarga, Martya, and Patala, The 4 yugas multiplied to 1000 comprise one day on the planet of Brahma. A similar period comprises a night of Brahma, in which the creator of the universe goes to sleep. Martya Loka is the name given to Earth because what is very distinctive here is death. People here don't live long. Longevity is very less. So it's a very distinctive feature of being born in this particular planet is the fact that lifespans are very short. So that's why, interestingly, the planet itself is called Martya Loka. Martya means to die, Mrityu. And it is practically that, we basically do not have much time on the planet. So if you waste it, you're done. After the end of Brahma's night, the creation of the 3 worlds begins again in the daytime of Brahma, and they continue to exist through the life duration of the 14 consecutive Manus or fathers of mankind. Each and every Manu enjoys a life of a little more than 71 sets of 4 millennium. My goodness, no one, I can't imagine occupying such a position. No devotee who has practically understood devotional service and wants to serve Krishna in Vrindavan or eternally in terms of wanting to serve Lord Chaitanya would want to basically be in an administrative position for 71 yuga cycles. Incredible. Trillions of years of administration. My goodness. Yeah, this very thought is just frightening. After the dissolution of each and every Manu, the next Manu comes in order, along with his descendants, who rule over the different planets. But the 7 famous sages and the demigods like Indra and their followers, such as the Gandharvas, all appear simultaneously with Manu. In the creation during Brahma's day, 3 planetary systems, Swarga, Matya, and Patala, revolve, and the inhabitants, including the lower animals, human beings, demigods, and pittas, appear and disappear in terms of their fruitive activities. And each and every change of Manu, the Supreme Personality of God, it appears by manifesting his internal potency in different incarnations as Manu and others. Thus, he maintains the universe by discovered power. At the end of the day, under the insignificant portion of the mode of darkness, the powerful manifestation of the universe merges in the darkness of night. By the influence of eternal time, the innumerable living entities remain merged in the dissolution, and everything is silent. When the night of Brahma ensues, all the 3 worlds are out of sight, and the sun and the moon are without glare, just as in the due course of an ordinary night. The devastation that takes place due to the fire emanating from the mouth of Sankarshana, and thus great sages like Bhrigu and other inhabitants of Maharloka transport themselves to Janaloka, being distressed by the warmth of the blazing fire which rages through the 3 worlds below. Actually, I'm going to stop reading. You can read the rest of the verses. I've given you a gist. So I think I'll take questions today, but then for all practical purposes, I have concluded this chapter. I've kind of given you a summary. The summary itself, I would like to kind of touch upon the topics again, because these are important for us. The summary itself is such that as living entities, when we are born, we have been set on a certain trajectory which we don't control. But then once we come in touch with devotional service, we come in touch with devotional service and the process of devotion is so powerfully that we have the ability to gain a greater level of control by elevating our consciousness. And our need for controlling the day is not so much so that we can be in control, but more so that we could offer the day effectively to Guru and Krishna. Now, how do you do it? That clue is what is being discussed here quite extensively. The clue that's being discussed here quite extensively is the fact that you do it by, in reality, ensuring that each and every appropriate junction of time during the day, you are able to bring Krishna into your life more effectively. So starting with the millennium, the sages gathered in Naimisharanya. They performed austerities, they performed yagyas, they brought auspiciousness. And then every year, we have opportunities. We have Gaur Purnima, we have the Ekadasis occurring twice a month, we have different festivals coming in. All of these are opportunities for us to bring in a great deal of auspiciousness with a conscious mood that this particular day, if I contribute effectively, they will receive mercy from the personality who basically is connected to this day. And then I would be able to manage the next I would be able to manage the next year effectively. This is a very important principle. Please don't underestimate the effectiveness of this principle of being able to contribute and to be able to consciously manage the day on that particular day, and then for you to be able to effectively give the year to Krishna is very important. You can actually set the tone for all kinds of positive changes to occur for many, many years if you were to be able to do this effectively. Now, we also spoke of the fact that this is also done on a daily basis by focusing on the junctions of time. The early morning junction is supremely important because whatever you do in the morning is practically going to dominate your consciousness throughout the day. If you're able to do that, it's the best thing that you could do. The very best thing for you to do is to ensure that you're able to chant. If you cannot do all the procedures of Mangalarti because of whatever your circumstances are, at the very least ensure that japa gets done during the time of sunrise and you're ready to kind of do some kind of worship, such as worship of Srila Prabhupada. All of that would be very, very, very useful because you'll have control over the day. And then comes the fact that you have the different junctions. All of these, again, are time for us to connect so that we could have better, idea of and become more conscious and more involved. So we'll stop here and we'll take a few questions if you have any. And then I've just basically, for all practical purposes, I have just ended the chapter. And we can, if you have more additional questions, we could always take it next week. Yeah, go ahead, please, if you have any questions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Wonderful class. Prabhu, I have two questions.
Yes.
One is Naimisharanya, you mentioned, is the most system. Is it still there in India or any other part that we can go and visit that place?
It is there. It is there. Basically, Naimisharanya is still very much a part of it, part of India. But then I'm not sure about access. I can come back to you on this question. I'll share this particular answer to you. But I think perhaps I can just share this separately.
Sure.
Yeah?
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah. Sure.
The other question was about pranayama, and you mentioned about increasing the longevity of life. And you mentioned early on about the sages who could practically, control their breath for the longevity. And you also mentioned straight afterwards, we don't have at the time of birth, the death is already defined. Now, my question is, are the sages any different? That their footprint or fingerprint, what was it? You said a specific word. I can't get the word, but that kind of, their stay is also the same, or is it different? Is my question.
I'm sorry. Well, can you just repeat the last part of your question?
Yeah. So my question is that you mentioned that we as human beings, we come with the trajectory that when you're born you have to die, kind of, it's almost fixed. Of course, devotees, you mentioned that Krishna plays a role, and then you said sages through pranayama prolong their life. So my question is, do they have control over the karma, or others don't? Can they define their life? Or, when they have to leave, we can't. And is there any? How are they not affected by the karmic thing that when you're born you have to die at a certain time?
Well, basically, they do come with karma, but then they apply their free will, and they are able to modify the destiny of life. So the application of free will is done through sadhana, is done through the different rituals, it's done through the different aspects of coming in touch with Krishna effectively. We have the same opportunity. There is no difference. We have the same opportunity. It is just that we don't, as a practical, what I would call as approach, we don't really focus on wanting to remain on the planet and leaving the planet in devotional service. We focus on wanting to ensure that we are able to give the time that we have effectively to Krishna till the very end. We leave the part about how long we're going to be on the planet, etc., to Krishna. We don't manage it. That's the difference.
Okay, now I understand.
Yeah.
I have one more question, Prabhu.
Mm-hmm.
This is more of a practical question, and this is more of sort of, so where you mentioned about planning week, you plan to the week, and you also plan your Krishna consciousness, and you also see where you want to go in the next year. And to some extent, I do plan. And where I find, and I also plan every day pretty much because of work and everything else, I find there's a thin line where you have a plan and you're working on that skeletal plan. Things sometimes come out of the way, and sometimes you can get a bit frustrated because you have decided you want to focus on this and something else has come on the way, and you're kind of pulled apart between the two goals, and there is a disturbance sometimes, internal conflict as well. Do I go with the flow or do I stick to my plan? I just want to give, if you could give some insight on this planning,
Yes.
being spontaneous or going with the flow.
True. See, one of the things that we do need to remember with Krishna consciousness as devotees is that there isn't what we would call a separation of what is considered to be material and what is considered to be spiritual. Our time and our identity is spiritual. So we don't have what we would call as two different identities or two different levels of activity, etc. So in that sense, what I'm trying to say is that as you plan your day, which is a must, which you're forced to, because in the material world, you're forced to plan. If you're working as a professional, then you do need to basically break your day into different parts, and you're very conscious about it. But the point is, there is always a Krishna factor. The Krishna factor is that you can make a plan, but then there is a factor where things may not go according to your plan. So that's when you basically submit yourself. And what I'm trying to say is that if you have the entire day for Krishna, then you will have the ability to plan, and you will still find that you're not able to do everything exactly as planned, but then you accept it based on what Krishna is giving you in terms of opportunity. But then you do your very best and you strive towards it. As you make greater level of advancement, then there are lesser disturbances and you're able to manage your time. Now, the point I was just wanting to also emphasize is the fact that the idea of planning should be there, regardless of whether we succeed in meeting every, I would say, objective that we have set. Yeah. So this way we can account for it. We can kind of keep things in mind, and then we can go forward and then structure it in a different way in the future. So I'm not sure if I addressed your question. Did I address your question with this statement that Krishna can interfere, and then we need to accept it as Krishna's arrangement, saying, yes, I planned for this, but then this is his acceptance of what I've planned. So I accept it. So that's why I'm saying, even if you are at work, you're still Krishna conscious. You are not two different people. So you do things and you constantly think that, okay, this is Krishna's idea. Then the more and more you get cultured to accepting things as they go along, as Krishna's arrangement, if they don't fall in line with your plan, the more and more we are able to remember him and we are able to move forward as well. Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So okay, that's one example. That was more professional stroke, material job and stuff. But say, for example, I went to temple in the morning. I said, today, I'm going to attend Mangalarati. I'm going to chant. And just as I'm sitting to chant, I've been called in for a service. Both are perfectly valid. But then again, so in that time, you think this is my chanting time, or this is somebody's called me for service. Do you say, no, I want to finish my rounds and then come, or you jump to say, okay, what can I do? What would your take be in that?
Yeah, see, basically, the idea is that this is a matter of discussion with whoever is calling you for service. Yeah? Because if you're going to constantly be disrupted during your time of chanting, then you will not accomplish much. It will sometime in the future, it is going to affect you. So you need to have a discussion saying, that this is not working for me. If it occurs every once in a while, which is say once in 2 months, once in 3 months, then it is okay because someone is under pressure and they're calling you for help with some service, it's perfectly fine. But if it's a consistent pattern, it requires for a discussion. There's no two ways about it.
So chanting is priority.
Chanting is priority because it will start getting to you at some point. Because at some point in the future, you'll start feeling the pressure of not being able to have proper japa sessions. It's good to be busy, but then if you're going to be so busy to the point where you can't have a japa session, for a practitioner as a sadhaka, then it's a very difficult proposition. You can't, if you're not able to do it consistently, then you're in trouble. There's some mismanagement going on somewhere. That's the point I'm trying to make. That's all.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Overall, yeah.
Thank you. That was really useful. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to take a couple of questions that have come on chat. The amount of breaths we take in a life is predetermined and not the length of life. So can what activities we do affect our speed of breathing and therefore decrease or increase the length of life? Absolutely. Yes. Yes. You know, there are some species who leave their bodies after engaging in the act of procreation. They just engage in the act of procreation once and their life ends. There are some species who don't exist after one attempt at procreation. That is the amount of prana that is being displaced when one engages in the activity of procreation. I'm giving an example to highlight that excessive engagement in the act of procreation can reduce the longevity of the individual. It can reduce the longevity of the individual because prana is being given up. So as a consequence, they are basically engaging in activity which is not very useful. Now, the other point is the fact that if you engage in activity which is basically going to have a lot of physical exertion, it can deplete prana unless you have a very strong, I would say, practice of being able to replenish and then top up, and you have spiritual practices as well. So the answer is yes, you can decrease and increase the length of life because of the fact that there is uneven breathing and there's exertion. So those days there was a balance in how you led life. There was a balance in terms of, you know, the whole idea of being able to manage activities and so on and so forth. These days we may not be fully aware of it, but we end up, you know, doing this. Why does the month in the Vaishnava calendar begin with Krishna Paksha, while the month begins with Shukla Paksha in the Hindu calendars? Actually, this is not so much, I would say, of a scientific, what I would call as, you know, basis. The scientific basis astronomically is the fact that Shukla Paksha is the waxing moon, and then Krishna Paksha is it when it becomes less and less and less and less, where the new moon has no light whatsoever because it is the closest to the sun, so the light is not being reflected properly. So the point is that there isn't what I would call a basis for this that I'm aware of. Yeah, Krishna Paksha being preferred by Vaishnavas versus Shukla Paksha in the Hindu calendar. I'm not really sure as in terms of why it's taken that way. I don't have a basis for it. Perhaps I can check and get back to you. Now, let me see what, yeah. I have a general question regarding chanting. I'm trying my best to chant with focus. However, I have been distracted by my thoughts. Please advise me how to overcome this issue. My intention is to chant without any offenses. Okay, this is a very good question. Now, one of the things that we have to understand about dealing with the mind is that the mind needs to know that you've allocated a specific time in the day for the activity of japa. So choose a time in the day and keep it consistent for the entire year. Choose a time in the day when you're not going to be disturbed, and you can keep it consistent for the entire year, your entire life. Now, what happens is the mind gets used to the japa activity if you were to begin doing it on a particular time. Now, the mind is also very tricky. The mind is also being trained to say that someone is waking up, they go and then wash up, and then they come, and then they sit in a specific spot, and then they face a certain wall, or they face the deities, they're sitting on a certain cushion, they do it at a certain time, and then they're doing japa. The mind calms down. The mind calms down because you have a sequence of events every day which lead to japa. And as a consequence, the mind is able to understand that, okay, if the person wakes up, goes to the washroom, comes back, they sit, and then basically are going to sit in a specific spot, specific cushion. This is what they're going to do. The mind has understood that. As a consequence, the mind calms down if you increase the number of repetitions of activity, which means waking up at the same time, going through the same kind of activity, sitting in the same spot, sitting in the same cushion. The mind calms down and then stops bothering you because now the mind knows that you're going to engage in japa. So my advice is to increase the quantum of repetitiveness before you chant. This is the first advice. Second, chanting and waking up for japa begins the previous night. You cannot plan for sadhana when you wake up. You need to have deep intentions of sadhana before you go to bed. If you go to bed with deep intentions of sadhana, you will wake up and be able to accomplish what you've thought of, because the mind is already being trained that I'm going to do this. So deep desires, the mind basically gets subdued in that as well. So eating, early and then going to bed and then waking up early is practically a cycle. But then there's also repetitive activities which help devotees so that they can maintain consistency. So I would suggest you start with that first so that the thoughts don't come. The second would be prasadam. Please ensure that there is absolutely very minimal contact with non-offered food. If you cannot offer something, then, or if you're having too much of prasadam, too much of food that is not offered, it will affect your japa. So that's the other area that you can control as well. Okay, now let's just see. There are a few more questions. Tomorrow is Nirjala Ekadasi. I have a few general questions on Ekadashi and fasting. In Srimad Bhagavatam 9.4, Ambarish Maharaj has a dilemma whether to break the fast within the specified time or to wait for his guests to arrive. Why does an Ekadashi fast have to be broken the following day within a specified time interval and after sunrise? And why does the length of the interval vary? Sometimes the Vaishnava Ekadasi is done on Dwadashi if the Ekadashi Tithi starts less than an hour, 1.5 hours before sunrise. Why is this period before sunrise considered impure? Is fasting always from sunrise to sunrise, even on Janmashtami? See, these are this particular aspect of fixing when to start fasting and when to break a fast. You will see a variance in Vrindavan amongst the various temples. Some temples, let me explain this. Ekadashi Tithi, for example, can begin now. Yeah. So I'm in Vrindavan. Ekadashi is being followed tomorrow in sunrise. But then, if I were to look at it, Ekadashi Tithi, 20% of the Tithi is already gone, which means that 20% of Ekadashi is already gone today. So there are temples in Vrindavan, there are certain groups in Vrindavan which would have started fasting for Ekadashi today, when the Ekadashi began, because they watch when the Ekadashi Tithi begins. Not necessarily at sunrise, but during the day, the Tithi can begin, and then you start fasting. And then they go on till the next sunrise, which is when the Dwadashi Tithi is dominating the sunrise. And then the fasting has to be done and to be broken before the next Tithi comes in. So this is basically a very variant principle. And the idea is that there are different calculations, and some people are very strict about starting when the Ekadashi begins. Others have it on the day of the Ekadashi, which is when the sunrise starts, and then they break the fast within 24 hours for the fruits to be coming in, etc. It is not so much of an impurity or purity business. It has more to do with what I would call as the rigors of completing the fast, which includes breaking the fast before the next Tithi begins in full stream. You see, that's very important. They fix the time for it and then they go about it. But that's a very variant principle. It is not something which is fixed, and then there are different groups who have different rules and regulations for it. Even in terms of what is eaten, what is not eaten, they all have different standards, different rules. But all of these, in one sense, are bona fide. But then what we want to do is we just want to follow one calendar. So in my case, I would just follow the ISKCON calendar. I may be aware that the Ekadasi has already started, yeah, but I follow the ISKCON calendar because for me, I would just stick with what I know in terms of a calendar that is consistent, and then we move on with it. So that's the point. So there was pressure to complete the fast because Dwadasi can become Trayodasi in some cases. Yeah, it is only Dwadasi until a certain time, and then it becomes Trayodasi. So there are different variations for these calculations. The point I'm trying to make is I may not be able to give you what I would call as a more black and white answer because of all the variables. There's the other question. I do all three aartis about 7 a.m. in the morning. Is that okay? Guru Puja, Tulsi Aarti, and Mangal Aarti. Absolutely. Whatever works for you. Whatever works for you. Yeah. The point is, 1 hour after, or the 1 hour within the 1.5 hour time frame, 45 minutes before sunrise, 45 minutes after, you still are very much in that particular time frame. But then we don't need to be very precise. You can actually do what works for you. And the idea is to understand that you manage the day by doing activities in the morning. More you invest spiritually in the morning, greater the opportunity to manage the day. Okay. This is a question by someone. I was hoping if you could share on activities in the general material world, such as life coaching and mentoring outside of Krishna consciousness. Although I can see it, although I see it can elevate somewhat individuals situated in ignorance and inertia into more passion and rajas. For the rajas to sattva, introduction to Krishna would be needed. Is it okay to be a life coach or mentor in the material world to guide others up to a potential passion stage until they get directed towards Krishna? Or would you suggest Krishna from the start? This is basically, it's a very good question. The answer is, we are in the business of elevating consciousness. We are in the business of elevating consciousness. And then we want to introduce principles of elevating consciousness in every which way we can to any group of people. And sometimes if it requires that we can't mention the name of Krishna because of cultural differences, but then we can elevate consciousness to bring them to the mode of goodness, then we can introduce Krishna, which is also perfectly fine. Yeah. So these are what I would call as judgment calls. And I would say judgment calls because you would need to make an assessment of the individual and try your very best to improve upon what you have in front of you. And then as you make improvements, you can offer prayers internally for you to be able to give Krishna to the person. And that empowerment and the prayer will also work. Yeah. But it is a judgment call. But I'm in complete agreement that it is not a waste of time to elevate people from where they are to a more functional state so that they can move forward. We are in that business. We are exactly in the business of making people more dynamic. We have the knowledge, and as a consequence, we need to extend ourselves more effectively. We want to coach people to be able to say that, you change this and you change that, and you have a more effective, month, day, year, etc. Absolutely. We shouldn't hesitate to employ our knowledge of the quality of consciousness and to make some small, minute adjustments. It can go a very long way in making changes towards them. And then we can bring Krishna to them. This is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is if you've already advertised that you're speaking on the Bhagavad Gita, if you've already advertised that you're going to speak on something, then you can speak on the topic more directly. And that can be to a larger audience. And then you kind of speak more narrowly to the person based on their needs. So it's a matter of judgment. As tomorrow is Nirjala Ekadasi, which is more beneficial to spiritual life, chanting more with normal fasting or chanting regular number of rounds with Nirjal fasting? Just wanted to concentrate on the more practical way. Okay, yes. Basically, if I were to be put forth with two options, one is that I can offer more japa, I can offer more service, and I can do more, but then I would need a meal, which is Ekadashi meal. I would go with that option. Yeah, because we are a preaching movement, and we Nirjal Ekadashi is very important. If you can do Nirjal every Ekadashi, it's super important, super nice. But then the point is, if you can't function beyond a certain point, and if the body is not going to agree and it's going to minimize you and you're not going to be effective, you're better off, not following it fully. You're better off doing what I would call as having one meal, Ekadashi meal, but then doing more japa, more service, etc. I think I will choose that option personally.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for that answer. I was just thinking it's not about actually other services. It's about my own practice of what I want to do more. So he said, okay, like reading, I'm studying and all that. If I have to do it, sometimes brain may not work. I don't know sometimes what happens.
Sorry, Hare Krishna, I can't hear you, Mataji.
Oh.
Sorry,
sorry.
What was it again? Yes, say that again.
Or sometimes, even though you are not planned to fast neutral or until evening, automatically Krishna makes you to fast. Sometimes many times it does happen. I never plan, but at the end of the day, I have fasted. So if that happens, it is okay. Otherwise, I was thinking it is good to chant more without falling asleep. Because if you're tired, you tend to fall asleep. This is about me myself.
Yes, true. Yeah, sometimes you're forced into it and then you accept it as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for your help.
Thank you. Haribo. Okay, this is Shastra condemns sex life a lot, whereas modern science, which is doctors, encourage to have a lot of sex as it has health benefits, both physical and mental. Also, they encourage contraception and abortions. Why modern science is giving completely contradictory suggestions? What will be the karmic future of these doctors? These contradictory suggestions are simply the state of consciousness. This is basically what it is that there is a complete lack of knowledge, there's complete ignorance of these values. But the modern day, there's a lot of knowledge that has actually come forth because of yoga, in the sense that there's more open discussion of the benefits of abstinence. And this benefit of abstinence from sexual activity is known to sports authorities. Back in the day when my Gurudev, he was mentoring Muhammad Ali, the boxer. Yeah, the very famous boxer, Muhammad Ali. He was mentored by my Guru Maharaj. And when he was mentoring him, he came across a circumstance where Muhammad Ali, he would stop all kinds of contact with the opposite gender, I think several months or before a big fight. He would just stop all contact with the opposite gender months before a big fight, as that would basically weaken him in certain ways in terms of his ability to concentrate and so on and so forth. So even modern sportsmen have this knowledge that there is a certain edge which is gained in abstinence. There's a certain edge which is gained in controlling sexual energy, understanding that sexual energy is energy, and that energy is super useful for so many different things. Yeah. So modern science basically knows that, but the point is, everybody has an audience. They're dealing with an audience which is somewhat demoniac and in ignorance, and they're feeding that audience with their own theories because it's comfortable for them. This is not a very comfortable topic for most people. Yeah, they don't want to broach this topic because that is the greatest pleasure which people have known on the planet. So as a consequence, nobody wants to broach this topic of abstinence. But do they know it? The answer is yes, they do know it, because there are many, many sports medicine authorities who are aware of training athletes before their fights, etc. They're very careful about them maintaining abstinence. So it is not unknown. It is not an alien principle, but then for different objectives. So it is just demoniac culture. So it's overall culture. So what do we do about a lack of knowledge about these facts? We don't focus so much on telling people what not to do. This is very important for us as Krishna conscious preachers. We are very, very careful. Be very careful in focusing on negative aspects, because they will run away from us. If you tell them that you chant for 2 hours and then you don't eat food which has onion and garlic, and then you have all these principles that you follow, they think that our life is hellish. They would just run away from us. They would have nothing to do with us. So we do not want to project the movement as a movement of austerity. We are not a movement of austerity. We are a movement of the greatest pleasure. And our greatest pleasure comes in terms of Harinam and Krishna Prasadam. Introduce people to Krishna Prasadam and introduce people to Harinam. Keep the philosophy to the side, not so much the philosophy in terms of, Krishna being supreme and Krishna Katha, but more so the philosophy of, or rather, which is bound by all kinds of rules and regulations, because nobody wants rules and regulations. It's not something which is exciting for them, because who would want to give up on things which they are very excited about? Nobody wants to do that, so it would not work for us. So it's important for us to ensure that we project Kirtan and we project Krishna Prasadam, and then we also speak according to the audience. If it's a mature audience which is very serious about their sadhana, then we give them details of what they should avoid. Otherwise, encourage people to visit us so that they could have prasadam with us. Encourage people to visit us so that they could participate in kirtan. This is what we're supposed to do. This will help us, because then they can slowly, steadily develop the taste and then give up the lower taste and pick up the higher taste. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to invite them for anything. Yeah. Is there any one last question that I could take before we go?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, if
Yes.
nobody has, can I ask if you?
Yes, please. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Prabhu, this happens in my practical life. Sometimes, okay, you have planned and it's whatever it is with the Lord, okay, only little, very few hours only for other works. And sometimes, some days, the whole plan toppled up. It doesn't go as I planned and get really frustrated. And sometimes you feel, oh Lord, you know that I want to chant. Why this happened? And I don't know how to. So what is the best way to think? Okay, maybe I'm not having enough mercy from the Lord. That's why I couldn't really do it. It's like, it's better to accept that situation. Otherwise, I will be thinking, oh, I'm the doer. I'm doing every day properly. I'm fixing this time. I'm doing it. So rather, you be humble, say you accept it, and then move forward. Will that be a good approach?
Yes. See, the point is that if there are too many disruptions, then there is something which we need to sit and look at why these are disruptions. Maybe there's something, the way we plan things, etc. We need to kind of alter it. Yeah. If there are too many disruptions, if there are too many changes, when it constantly happens, then it means it's a sign that something is wrong deeper. However, the best way to accept things is for us to basically have the mindset of trying to do things as if it depends on us, but also keeping in mind that everything depends on Krishna. So we do everything as if everything depends on us, which means we put all our effort, we put all our, I would say, endeavor towards doing things the way we see fit. And then we leave the results to the Lord. Yeah. So that's the attitude. That's the right attitude. But if it's a consistent issue, then there's something wrong with the way we are doing things. We need to kind of, step back and not kind of assume things that this is Krishna, because it's almost like saying that if something goes wrong all the time, oh, this is Krishna's fault. Krishna doesn't, it's Krishna basically. Krishna is interfering. We have to remember, Krishna doesn't. Why should Krishna interfere with Krishna consciousness? Krishna is not going to interfere with Krishna consciousness. Krishna is not going to interrupt his projects. So there must be something which we need to re-examine, revisit, if we have constant obstacles in any one particular area, it might be that the approach is not consistent. However, if we have done everything accordingly and we have understood it, but then yet we face obstacles, then we need to kind of sit back and say that, yes, this is your plan, this is Krishna, this is basically, this is the outcome is managed by you, Krishna. I have nothing more to offer, in terms of what I would call as, I've tried my best, but this is basically yours. Then I can try and do it again or then revisit it in a different way. So what I'm saying is sometimes we don't want to simply think it is Krishna when we can actually improve upon things.
Okay. So basically we can improve upon our modes. It's all, if it doesn't work, I think 90% it's due to our modes, probably.
Yes. We want to think that way so that we could make improvements, but we also want to remember that the Krishna factor is all present.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
And you said something deeper. Can you please elaborate on that, Prabhu?
Which means that there could be an issue. See, everything ultimately boils down to consciousness.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything ultimately boils down to consciousness. So it is all about being able to alter things when we hold on to the japa bag. Yeah. We want to fix things when we hold on to the japa bag. And if you do the japa extraordinarily well, then we will find that there's some insight, there's some angle that we can understand, which which was not very clear until now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Haribol. All right. So thank you very much. I think if there aren't any more questions, I'm just ending the conversation. Please do read the chapter after the fact so that you could kind of come back with more questions, or you could always reach me on WhatsApp, and I will try my very best to respond. So thank you for joining me. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.